We are recording. Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. I'm excited to continue our conversation with Robert Messick. He's the host of Book of Mormon Editions, and we're going to dive into some of the non-LDS editions of the Book of Mormon published by other restoration groups. And also, we're going to talk about the famous gold edition of the Book of Mormon that, thank you, Willie Grills, you gave me this one. And this is one of the cool ones. So we'll also talk about the famous blue one that most of you remember from the 1970s. So you won't want to miss this episode. Check it out.
So going back, what's interesting is 1860s, we know that Joseph Smith III was staying around with the family in Nauvoo, and there was quite a few members in Nauvoo, and they said, hey, let's reorganize a church. And obviously, we know church history in 1860, the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was set up. What was interesting is they used the 1840 Book of Mormon. And so obviously that was the last one that they had printed. Joseph Smith also, when he authorized the 1840, he actually did do quite a few edits. So
there's a lot of edits in the 1840?
Well, this is interesting because all of the controversy could have been done away with for the last hundreds of years, because in the 1840 edition, Joseph Smith in 2nd Nephi did, instead of white and delightsome, he actually did change pure and delightsome people.
Right.
And so the 1840 had it, but once again, the 1837 that Brigham Young had didn't. And so the Salt Lake had it for years in terms of the white and delightsome phrase instead of pure and delightsome. And so the reorganized members had the 1840, or had a lot of the volumes of the 1840 text. And so that actually was the precursor for the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Okay.
Yeah.
So theirs was printed with white and delightsome rather than pure and delightsome.
No, opposite. RLDS did the pure and delightsome, and Salt Lake had a white and delightsome phrase in it.
Okay.
And so it continued onward to 1874 that they said, okay, by this time, the 1840 volumes, and there was one printed in about 1858. That was a third-party printing that they kind of got their hands on. But about then, in 1874, was the first printing of the RLDS Church. And it's called the 1874 RLDS printing.
Okay. So that's the first non-LDS printing. Is that right?
Well, in 1858, there's the third party. It's called James O. Wright. And what's interesting is those Mormons were out in Utah, and the copyright to the Book of Mormon had expired. So there was an entrepreneur by the name of James O. Wright that said, oh, let's take the Book of Mormon. And he made several thousand copies. And he printed one in 1858 saying, oh, what are those Mormons thinking and doing? Here's the book that started it all. And it didn't sell very well. And so he was trying to sell them and didn't. And eventually some of the church members contacted him and said, hey, we'll take them for pennies on the dollar. And he said, okay, here you go. And so it's a miracle for the saints, but it was a tragedy for a businessman in the 1850s.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. But by then, 1874. So
was that the first secular printing?
Yeah. 1858, okay. James O. Wright is considered the first third-party printing of the Book of Mormon.
Okay.
And once again, then the challenge is it then becomes inherited into some of the memberships and some of the congregations. So they can say, well, no, it's an official church. They changed an introduction. They kind of redid the introduction and did it proper for the saints there.
Okay.
So 1874 had it. What's interesting is at that time as well, we know church history. We know that in 1837, Oliver Cowdery leaves the church with the Whitmer family.
Right.
What does Oliver Cowdery have? He's got the printer's manuscript of the Book of Mormon.
Oh, yeah.
So Oliver has the printer's manuscript of the Book of Mormon. Through his life, he dies in 1850, and the Whitmer family inherits the printer's manuscript.
Okay.
And so the Whitmer family has the printer's manuscript. What's interesting is a lot of times the missionaries that would go to England would actually rendezvous and stop in Missouri to visit David Whitmer and then go to Salt Lake or kind of back and forth. And David Whitmer was always proud to show off the printer's manuscript, and he was always a witness to the Book of Mormon.
Now, we should just mention Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer were brother-in-laws, right?
Oliver Cowdery married a Whitmer girl.
Yeah.
And I think it was a sister to David Whitmer.
Yeah.
Father Whitmer's daughter. So,
Okay.
and so, they were brothers-in-laws. And
Yeah.
so the Whitmer family was very, they were very supportive of the Book of Mormon, and they would always witness to the Book of Mormon. What would happen is they created their own church called the Church of Christ, and they were called the Whitmerites.
Right.
And in 1899,
this may be my first. No, I guess one other person talked about the Whitmerites, Steve Shields, but you'll be only my second person to talk about the Whitmerites, so this is good.
Yeah. So they call themselves the Church of
Christ.
The Church of Christ.
Because that was the original 1830 name.
Yeah, the Church of Christ, and we call them the Whitmerites. And
to not get them confused with Church of Christ Templeot or Hedrickites or Church of, Church of Jesus Christ. They're the Cutlerites. Yeah, anyway. We're not very original with our names.
No. All the ites, right?
Yeah.
They're all the ites. And so the Whitmer family had the printer's manuscript of the Book of Mormon, and they printed a copy in 1899.
Okay.
But they didn't want to get in trouble with Salt Lake, and so they called their book called the Nephite Records.
The Nephite Records, not the record of the Nephites.
Correct. It's called
because that's another one we're going to talk about.
We're going to talk about that one too. Yeah. So the Nephite Records was printed in 1899.
Is that an 1899 printing?
This is an 1899 Nephite Records. Yep. This is
not a replica. This is a real deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
That one sets you back a bit.
Yeah. But we love it. It's good. I don't know the print count, and so I'm interested in kind of finding like the survivability on these as well.
So does it say a printing company on there?
It's the Church of Christ, 1899.
But it doesn't say E.B. Grandin or something like that.
No. It does recognize Joseph Smith as translated by Joseph Smith, published by Church of Christ.
Okay.
From the 1830 volume of the Book of Mormon.
Okay.
Here's the challenge. I don't think they did the 1830 Book of Mormon. I think they actually went to the printer's manuscript and kind of cross-compared and created their text of the Book of Mormon. Here's the reason why. Salt Lake.
Because that wouldn't have been in copyright, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So what's also interesting is Orson Pratt was very influential in printing the Book of Mormon in Salt Lake. And when Brigham Young died in the early 1870s, it rested on Orson Pratt to print the Book of Mormon. And he printed the Book of Mormon in 1879, and that's a benchmark date because in 1879, Orson Pratt reversified the Book of Mormon, the Salt Lake edition of the Book of Mormon.
He created different verses.
Yeah.
Because they used to be really long verses, and he shortened them essentially.
Yeah, and so the 1830 and all of the early 1800s was just novel form, no versing and very little chapter breaks.
Right.
And so rather than the cumbersome chapters of really long chapters, Orson Pratt did reversify, shorten the verses to, one sentence or one phrase or significant, a chunk of verse, if you will. And so instead of 7 chapters in First Nephi, I believe First Nephi is now 22 chapters in First Nephi. Right. So same text, just different.
Right.
And so that's unique to Salt Lake in 1879 and onward.
Now, Brant Gardner doesn't like what Pratt did on that, so he's come out with his own version. Do you have that one yet?
Probably. And that's been the topic because Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints didn't do that, and they actually kept the same 7 chapters for the First Nephi.
Okay.
And so it was kind of interesting that that was the separation for versification. And so you have the RLDS versing, and then you have the LDS versing as of 1879 and onward. So here comes the 1899 printing. And what do you think it's versed as?
Goes back to RLDS.
No, it goes to Salt Lake.
It does?
It's versified as Salt Lake.
Oh, so, that's weird.
Yeah. And my only thought, and I don't know this, but the if you can't beat them, join them attitude of Salt Lake had this from 1879 and onward. And if we're trying to get into the influence of Book of Mormon, we might as well versify the Book of Mormon,
Can't beat them, join
the Nephite Records in 1899. And so what's also interesting is that the Whitmer family started to peter off, and this Church of Christ kind of started to dwindle. And
it didn't start till 1869, did it? you know
Yeah,
that?
I don't know the exact date, but yeah, it was
a
kind
lot
of much
later.
later.
Yeah.
And it consisted of the Whitmer family and anybody, any friends of the Whitmers that are in the area.
Okay.
So the Whitmer family had this 1899 Nephite records, but they also had the printer's manuscript still. And as they were kind of petering out, 1903 comes along and they offer the printer's manuscript up for sale. Salt Lake didn't want it.
Dummies.
I know.
Do you see how much money you could have saved?
Jeez. You could have had it in 1903, but it took you...
For how much?
2017, was it, that they purchased this?
It was $35 million. How much would it have been in 1903? Or how much did the RLDS Church pay for it?
Was it a couple thousand, like $2,500, $1,500?
Wow.
Like less than $5,000 maybe, or something like that. And so the RLDS Church was very happy that we got the printer's manuscript.
Yeah.
And so with that, the RLDS Church looked at it and said, oh, we've got to look at the printer's manuscript and it's about time for us to update our edition of the Book of Mormon.
Oh.
And so in 1908 was the the printing of the RLDS Church for a 1908 printing after they acquired the printer's manuscript.
And did they go back to the original versing or did they go with the Salt Lake versing?
They changed versing's also. And
to match?
No, this was interesting. Previously, they had long paragraphs with paragraph numbers. And then in 1908, with the 1908 copy, they kept the same chapters, but for every sentence, they actually versified the sentence.
Oh, they just stopped at the sentence level.
Yeah, so like First Nephi chapter 7 is like 115 verses long.
Oh.
And so this becoming the standard for the 1908 or for the RLDS Church for years to come, because they were extremely excited. They had a printer's manuscript. It was now put our stake in the ground. This is what we're going to have.
Most accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they were really proud of it.
So back to White and Delightsome then, right?
No, it was Pure and Delightsome after that.
But the printer's manuscript didn't say pure, did it? I don't think it did.
What's interesting is researchers can see this later in the Salt Lake versions, Alma chapter 32, verse 30. They talk about the seed, which is good, and it beginneth to grow and things like that. There's a phrase that actually was missing in the 1830 volume all the way through.
Oh, wow.
And so the 1908 RLDS Church had that because the printer's manuscript had it. So they did keep the Pure and Delightsome, I believe, and they added that from the printer's manuscript. It was a duplicate and it beginneth and swelleth to grow phrase. Okay. So I was really excited that, wow, that was the first.
So that was missing for 68 years then, 78.
And it was missing in Salt Lake until 1981.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So with RLDS printings, the benchmark of 1908 was onward for a long, long time until about 1960s.
So which one did you just have in your hand just now? This is the RLDS 1908 edition, is that right?
So this is a 1908 RLDS volume.
Okay.
Printed in 1908 and continued through. They reprinted and had, once again, printing dates in the 1916 and 1934s and onward. But 1966 was interesting because the RLDS Church realized that it was and it came to pass phrases were cumbersome and some of the old English was a little cumbersome. And so they actually printed a new volume called, their authorized volume in 1966. What's interesting, Rick, is that they had a dust cover.
Wow.
And the dust cover.
I've never seen that before.
Yeah. So they had a dust cover, and the dust cover you'll recognize as Reformed Egyptian.
Yeah, I was going to say. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Now,
Is it the same thing on front and back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which was interesting, and they've got a little temple of Teotihuacan in.
So they were Meso people too.
Yeah, they were Central American fans in 1966. And so they printed it and were bold enough to print Reformed Egyptian on their cover.
Yeah.
What's also interesting is they took out phrases of the "and it came to pass" phrases. Behold.
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
Just because it was repetitive.
Yeah. It's actually about 4%. 4%, not say smaller, but they took out about 4% of the volume of the Book of Mormon.
4% of the Book of Mormon as it came to pass.
So with that, some people in the RLDS Church liked it, some people didn't. And so they didn't know what to do. And so they actually did a printing of the original 1908 volume, and they also kept this edited copy. And so this is why today, 1984, and people, you've done a lot of church history on this one. 1984, the RLDS Church had some doctrinal changes that some people didn't like, some people were okay with.
Right.
Year 2000.
Women could get the priesthood. That was the big one.
That was a big one, yeah.
Yeah.
And year 2000, they changed their name to Community of Christ.
Right.
And so as of today, they actually have a printing of the Book of Mormon, but they actually have 2 volumes. And one's called the Authorized Edition, and one's called the Revised Authorized Edition.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know this.
Yeah, the Authorized Edition is your traditional 1908 text, and your Revised Authorized Edition is your 1966 edited text.
Oh, okay.
And so it's real interesting seeing, congratulations to the Community of Christ. They've got 2 volumes that they consider valid that they have on either websites or printing places.
Oh, so you know what's funny? I went to World Conference, well, I guess it's been about almost 2 years ago, and there was a resolution to put the scriptures online, the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants. I guess they don't have a Pearl of Great Prize, so that didn't matter. And it was a close vote, but to my utter shock, they voted against putting it online, mostly because they were worried about money, it sounds like. And even though it was like 51-49, it was really close.
Wow.
It was really close vote. But I just was like, this is a no-brainer. What's going on here? Well, the first president just decided we're going to just put it online. But I don't know, because I didn't know they had 2 different versions, if it's the revised or the authorized edition. Do you have any idea? It'll
be listed as the RAV or the AV. And so in the title, it will be kind of listed as either or.
Okay.
And it escapes me around, maybe the commentaries can kind of comment on it, but it escapes me on, I think that they do the authorized version, and they've still got like warehouses full of previous ones for the revised authorized edition that they really haven't made.
So we've got the purists and then the modernists, I guess,
right.
huh? Yeah. That's interesting.
Well, you had mentioned, 1984, there was quite a few maybe breakoffs or people who kind of said, hey, we're no longer part of the RLDS Church. What do we do? And so there was a couple of independent publishers that wanted to print the Book of Mormon. And so they actually did a 1908 reprint, or they took the 1908 text because it was in public domain, and they then printed the Book of Mormon in 1908. So a lot of your restoration branches, a lot of your non-affiliated RLDS groups will read a volume from Price Publishing.
I was going to say Richard and Pamela Price.
Yeah, and then,
they're the big RLDS publishers.
That's right, and they do a great job, because they did a 1908 volume in modern times that stuck to the 1908 text, if you will. There was also a group called the Zarahemla Research Foundation that is in Independence, and they printed a restored covenant edition.
And so this is not the Heartland group.
No.
Okay.
No. What's interesting is this is one of the first red letter versions.
Red letter, that's a heresy in the LDS Church, which I think is the weirdest thing ever. But why? I will ask you this question, and it's fine if you don't know the answer. Why in the world does the LDS Church care that they hate the red letter edition? I think it's weird.
We talked about this, but I think
I know.
one of the things that I came up with is, I think Salt Lake has one of their common themes is that we can receive personal revelation for ourselves in terms of what.
And we don't get it with red letters?
Well, the idea behind it is they'll provide the text in black and white so that you can mark your own scriptures. And there's been quite a few times when, like, okay, you take the red pen and mark all words of the Savior, and it becomes more meaningful for that person. And so I think at this particular time, Salt Lake will say, we'll give it to you black and white, and you get to mark it up.
That's weird,
Yeah.
but okay.
Well, what's interesting, on my video, I did a review, and I don't have it with me right now, but there's a third party that actually highlighted all the text in 200 different colors of who's speaking or who's writing. So 200. Nephi is one color, Lehi is another color, Laban and Lemuel, when they say 3 or 4 words, is another color.
You can't read those words, right?
And so,
no, just kidding.
Yeah, it was like 250 colors in terms of either voices in the Book of Mormon.
How many shades of red are there?
There's a lot of shades of red. And that one was a red letter edition as well.
Oh, okay.
So the restored or the restoration branches do well in terms of having their own copies of the Book of Mormon as well.
Okay. They're basically to the prices.
To the prices. And then the Zarahemla Research Foundation as well. So.
Okay.
But there's another one that's in the independent that we haven't talked about. And you had mentioned it's the Temple Lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember if theirs is red letter. Do you know? It's not red letter. Okay. Red costs more money. I can understand. Yeah, they're not a rich church. I'd print it in black and white if I wasn't rich.
Black and white sounds just fine, especially if you only print a few copies rather than have millions of copies printed. So Temple Lot Church, same thing. They're independent of RLDS, and they're independent of Salt Lake. So what do? They print their own copy of the Book of Mormon
based on
the RLDS volume. And so
the 1908?
Yeah, the 1908 volume of the Book of Mormon. What's interesting in, once again, church history influences the Book of Mormon. Book of Mormon influences church history. RLDS history in the 1920s is that there was a couple of confusions, and a lot of RLDS members went into the Temple Lot Church. And then with that Temple Lot Church, the Otto Fetting story.
Right.
Otto Fetting.
Now, I know who Otto Fetting is, but a lot of people don't. So give us a background on Otto Fetting. I think it's an interesting story.
Yeah. Once again, bear with me because I'm giving
I'll fill in the details.
35,000 feet information rather than like whole doctoral dissertations on Otto Fetting.
Right.
Great. 1929, I think, Otto is a member and actually in leadership inside the Church of the Temple Lot Church, the Church of Christ Temple Lot.
Before that, he was RLDS.
He moved over from the RLDS group into the Temple Lot. And people liked him in the Temple Lot Church, and so he became, I think, one of the apostles.
Yeah.
And so he came to a conference and he had a claim that said, I was visited by John the Baptist. And I have a message for the congregation. And they said, what is it? Let us know. And so he gave actually a series of messages, and there are, I think, 80 messages over the course of years' time. One of them was, I think message 12 was the significant one because they said, John the Baptist said to Otto Fetting that the Temple Lot Church was the only church and not to recognize the RLDS and not recognize Salt Lake. And it kind of upset a couple of people because obviously they had relatives in our LDS Church, and they had a handshake agreement saying your baptism is valid.
Yeah.
Wherever your baptism
is. They could switch between RLDS and Church of Christ, and the baptism was valid. The priesthood was valid both directions.
And he said, no way in message 12. And so the group didn't like it, and it actually took about half of the Church of Christ Temple Lot away.
Well, and the other thing is he wanted everybody to get rebaptized. And that's like a no-no.
Yeah.
Like, if we were baptized, we don't need to be baptized again. Like, that's a big RLDS thing. And that's why, even to this day, the RLDS Church, they not only recognize Temple Lot baptisms, but they'll recognize a Presbyterian, Catholic, whatever, as long as you were 8.
Right.
They don't do well. They're even trying to change that. That was a big deal at World Conference last time. I wonder if it comes up again, because all the Europeans that are Lutheran or Catholic are like, well, I'd like to join Community of Christ, but I don't want to get rebaptized. And so it was like, I don't want to say contentious, but it was passionate. Like, people on both sides of that issue. And
so imagine in the 1920s this happening. And we don't have the technology as we do today. And Otto Fetting says, tough, this is what we're going to do. And,
and they're like, Otto hit the road.
Yeah.
And so he did.
He created another Church of Christ. And from there,
with the Elijah message,
it kind of gets a little complicated because it actually has quite a few branches and breakoffs.
Yeah, there's at least 3 I know about.
Yeah, one of the specific
I think 2 of them combined back.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and combined back. And
we call those the Fenningites. We haven't talked about them much, a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've talked about them a little bit here.
One of them is
we've actually had an apostle for one of the Elijah Message Church. Shout out to Adam Stokes.
Again. One of them is the Church of Christ with the Elijah Message.
Yeah.
And they actually have a printed copy of the Book of Mormon. And it's called The Record of the Nephite.
Not the Nephite record.
Not the Nephite records. But guess what? It's actually patterned after the Nephite records.
Oh, really?
Because what's interesting is you have an RLDS, like influence of an influence inside the RLDS group that finally gets the Elijah Message group, if you will. But they go back to the 1899 Nephite records, which is also Salt Lake versing. And so this...
Wait. 1899 is Whitmer.
Whitmer's, yeah.
So it's the Whitmer version.
So we talked about the 1899 Whitmer version.
Yeah.
Salt Lake, if you can't beat them,
but then they put Salt Lake versing in it. That's interesting.
They put Salt Lake versing in them. And then so the Elijah Message group loved the Nephite records. One of the message also was, hey, when you print the Book of Mormon, it's going to be called the Record of the Nephites. So they said, well, if it's the Record of the Nephites, we'll take the Nephite records volume as a source text. And they printed the Record of the Nephites from the 1899 Nephite records, which is Salt Lake texting.
Okay, so this makes more sense. I was just down in Arizona at the dentist, because my dentist is in Arizona, believe it or not. Shout out to Tom Hawks, he's awesome. But he was telling me that he had a copy, and I'll show a picture of the Record of the Nephites, and he said it was the David Whitmer version, but when I opened it up, it said Church of Jesus Christ with the Elijah Message, and I was confused, but you explained what the relationship is, so I appreciate that.
The one that you saw was a 1957 printing, and it lists here that the first printing of this group was 1957. Oh. And then they had multiple printings after that.
And what version do you have there? I can't see it.
2010.
Oh, that's a new one.
And I believe this is a print on demand, so I think it's going to be modern and immediately printed as a 2010 format, if you will.
Okay.
Not too much changes other than just paper and...
So were you jealous I saw a 1957
Congratulations,
version?
You have a 1957, you've seen it.
I don't have one.
I've not seen it.
Tom has one.
Oh. So that's kind of interesting that you have RLDS influence by way of auto-fetting, by way of
David Whitmer.
Yeah, David Whitmer. that has the influence of Salt Lake, Texas.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. So where do we go next? Are we going to pick another denomination? Because we've been skipping back. There's two LDS versions, and I don't know, we can go wherever you want to go.
Yeah.
But there's two LDS versions. There's the blue one with the angel Moroni on the cover. That one, Chris Thomas was influenced by that one. That's the one I remember as a young boy. And also, what was the other one I was going to mention? Oh, the gold one. Oh, you just pulled it out. My friend, he's a Lutheran pastor, Willie Grills, got one of those at a Goodwill, and he's like, I don't want this. Do you want it? And I'm like, yes. So I got that one. So tell us about those two versions.
1963, the church participates in the World's Fair, and they're preparing a couple of years beforehand for the World's Fair in New York City. Big exposure. It's time for us to kind of be mainstream more and more. And so they actually have a pavilion, amazing building in the World's Fair. And I think this World's Fair is like a couple of years long of a World's Fair for people to come and go, if you will. Okay. Basically an amusement park for a couple of years with all of the look at us businesses.
This is 63, you said?
1963, 1964. And so in 1961, they actually start preparing for a new volume of the Book of Mormon.
So this is the first one since 1920?
There had been other printings of a 1920 format, but all of them had been just drab covers and cloth covers, if you will, or hard covers. And what's interesting, in 1950, there was new technology that came out called soft cover printing. And so you actually had pages that would be then glued together and glued on a soft cover rather than stitched with a hardback board. And this was new technology in 1950. And so 1950, there was some significant missionary volumes printed. That was the new style.
So kind of a paperback version, basically?
Yeah. And so 1960s, they were preparing for the World's Fair, and they said, we need a good-looking Book of Mormon. And this is kind of the first time the church started, for better words, marketing their missionary work better. And so because of it, they created a better-looking copy of the Book of Mormon so that it could be seen from a distance and things like that. And so they did a Blue Angel Moroni with a blue cover. And they started printing en masse on this. So like exponentially more copies because it was getting out that this was in the pavilion, missionary work was going forward, everything. And so they uniform saying, this is the cover, this is the copy that we've got. And so everyone knows this copy.
That was the one Chris Thomas was introduced to, I remember. I'm trying to remember if Steve Pinecker did that one. I think he was familiar with that one too.
This is also the first volume that had the pictures in it.
Arnold
Freyberg did pictures. He was commissioned in the 1950s to do children's friend pictures, and he did 12 of them. By 1961, there was, I think, 8 of them ready. And so that's why you have 8, and actually there's 12 pictures, and so there's 4 pictures not included in this blue cover Book of Mormon.
That's the 63 version.
Yeah. And so for years, then this becomes this 1960s, 70s, all through the 70s, and then 1981 is our common current Salt Lake Book of Mormon.
Okay. And the other thing to mention about Arnold Freyberg was Cecil B. DeMille, who made the 10 Commandments, was like, this guy's an amazing artist. I'm going to have him help me with the 10 Commandments.
He did the artwork for the 10 Commandments.
Yeah.
Real buff, imagery.
Yeah. Charlton Heston.
So same thing, there was another World's Fair or a symposium, and they did these as commemorative editions. And so these were in 1976 through 1979, if you will.
Okay.
So 3-4 years. And so this is the first time that we did Reformed Egyptian on our volumes.
Do you know, is that...
I can't read it, no.
But is that, do we know, is that like Anthon Reformed Egyptian, do we know?
Oh, I'm upside down. Would you believe I was upside down?
Oh, I could believe that, because who knows?
So the Anthon transcript in modern news is the piece of paper that has the Reformed Egyptian. It was in the hands of the RLDS Church, Community of Christ, and then transferred over in 2024 with the large purchase of assets.
Well,
I'm sorry. It's called the Characters document.
Right.
Whoa.
That's different than the Anthon scripture.
Yes. So
a lot of people thought the Characters document was Anthon, but it wasn't.
You got me.
Sorry. You're talking to a nerd.
So the Characters document was the symbols in a scrap of paper.
From David Whitmer, one of the Whitmers.
Yeah, David Whitmer, the Whitmer family. And so it actually was passed with the printer's manuscript and was kept with the RLDS Church.
And we just bought it.
2024, the Salt Lake Church acquired it, yeah. We had pictures of it often, and obviously in 1960s, the RLDS Church, did it. And so those images have been published quite often through time. And I guess we got permission because, yes, letter for letter, this is the Characters document.
Oh, okay.
So I guess there's 2 H's and squiggles, but yeah, you can recognize it.
That is the Characters. I didn't realize that. I thought it was just a bunch of squiggles somebody made up.
What's interesting is this has also a unfortunate story because in the 1980s, once again, we had this new 1981 blue Book of Mormon with the gold lettering. And there's an unfortunate situation in Salt Lake where a book collector has some car bombs and starts blowing up some people.
I think I've heard of him.
Yeah, by the name of Mark Hoffman. And so it was an unfortunate time with the church. And so after that, a couple of years after or so, they said, this is kind of where I started understanding that the church would start going in terms of the Book of Mormon by faith rather than the Book of Mormon by artifact. They started taking the Central American pictures out of the Book of Mormon about that time too or so. And so they actually made a request to say, hey, church libraries, if you have this gold Book of Mormon, go ahead and dispose of them. We want a uniform Book of Mormon.
Dispose of them?
Yeah.
What's a historian to say about that? That's terrible.
Yeah. So The private collectors have them, and the church no longer has the gold. It had the gold in their libraries.
Willie Grills, thank you for sending me one. My dad had one, but I don't know where it is now.
Yeah. Unfortunately, for collectors, it's really hard because it's so easily to bend and earmark this gold leaf.
Yeah.
So either you have nice ones or they've been butchered pretty hard.
Yeah.
So it really just depends on the quality of the book.
So are those worth more than your average Book of Mormon? $20?
30 to 50.
Oh, wow.
Plus.
I didn't know that.
I have a hard time.
Thank you, Willie.
I have a hard time with eBay because there's sometimes it's like, oh yeah, 150, one of a kind. It's like, oh, I don't want to tell you you're wrong, but I wouldn't pay that, and I don't think anyone should. So,
but people, if they don't know, they will.
Yeah. So, but once again, if you want one, you'll do anything to get one.
Right, right.
So those are the Salt Lake printings since
those
then.
are all the Salt Lake. All right. So we were talking about RLDS. Were we done with them, or should we move?
In general.
Okay, so they don't have any. What's their latest one?
It
was the 2 volumes, the RAV and the AV.
Yeah, and they have also.
And those come from what years?
What's interesting is they have changed their imagery to Community of Christ. So the publisher is to Community of Christ.
Right.
So this is after year 2000 and onward that they'll have Community of Christ.
So 2000 is the newest one essentially for RLDS.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's another denomination that we didn't talk about that, once again, Succession Crisis is so fun to talk about because it actually splits Book of Mormon printing as well.
For sure. But as far as LDS, isn't there a 2013 Book of Mormon?
Yeah.
Because we haven't talked about that one.
Okay.
Before we would jump into the others, let's finish with the LDS. Do you have a 2013? Because it doesn't seem very different from any of the others. I don't even know. I think they might have changed some chapter headings or something.
So I brought the ones for denominations, and I was like, oh, we got Salt Lake. Oh, we got Salt Lake. But here's the fun part. 1980. Okay, so real fun one. 1981 was Book of Mormon, and it was only a title of Book of Mormon. And in 1982, they actually added a subtitle of Another Testament of Jesus Christ. So if you find a 1981 volume, it's the only volume that has just the Book of Mormon without a subtitle.
Oh, okay.
2013 comes along and they want to update the copyright of the Book of Mormon. As we'd mentioned, 2004, the Doubleday edition had come out, and they actually did a couple edits inside it. For reference, it was one of them is Moroni chapter 3. They changed parentheses in calling to be a teacher, comma, or parentheses or a priest. And so the parentheses were changed, a couple things like that. And so they wanted to update and do a new copyright of the Book of Mormon. And so in 2013, there is a new copyright. What you can tell is the subtitle, Another Testament of Jesus Christ. The 2013 volumes will have Another Testament of, and then your second line will be Jesus Christ. And prior to that, 1981 to 2012 is Another Testament, and then your second line is of Jesus Christ. So that word of has been moved around.
Oh.
So you can see the 2013.
Well, that makes a big difference.
Yeah. And I think it makes the words Jesus Christ as unique and separated, so that it actually does stand out.
Okay.
And so 2013 onward is our current Salt Lake edition of the Book of Mormon. What's interesting is the page numbering as well as the page breaks has not been changed since 1980s. It'll be interesting to see what the Salt Lake Church does for the 2030 anniversary. Will there be a new cover or an updated format or anything like that? So I don't think so, because now your Come Follow Me will also do page number references to a Book of Mormon. So now that they've kind of doubled down on page numbering to find a particular location of a verse or something like that, it then solidifies the page numbering on Book of Mormon.
We got to keep it there or mess up the printer. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Robert Messick of Book of Mormon Editions. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about the Book of Mormon census he's putting together, and we'll also talk about some of the breakoffs and other different versions of Book of Mormon.
I love it because as I've gone through this, I've been asked often, well, how many copies of the 1830 Book of Mormon are still left? I started doing reviews on my YouTube series for the 1830 Book of Mormon. And if you ever experience one, it is electrifying. We call it the spirit, but like if you touch one, you're like, oh, this is awesome. And so
Yeah.
I recommend actually anybody, BYU Library has one on display. The Church History Museum has a few on display. They're significant. They're powerful to actually just look at.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.